original sales brochure said, "A new shape, jet sleek from headlight to tail. It's a dream of a car that you learn to love for the thrill of sheer pleasure. In you get, key start, into first, second, crisp change, third gear near 60 and snap it into top. And away, exciting. Trees flashing by, a grey ribbon of road, discover a zest you'd forgotten. Driving is fun. Settle back and work through that 4-speed magic box. Coax every ounce from the long striding engine. Feel safe as a rock as you corner on rails. Fingertip steering, brakes that take note of the touch of a toe. And relish a styling that's really practical." Well, the Ford Anglia 105E, when it was launched in late 1959, was a really revolutionary car. The main impact that it had on people was the fact that the window was sloping in the opposite direction from what it did on a conventional car, and it also had these fins on the back. Under the skin, mechanically, it was also almost completely new, having a new overhead valve, 997cc's engine, a new gearbox which had 4 speeds, whereas the previous models that had side valve engines and 3-speed gearboxes. The initial model, which came out in 1959, was a saloon, and following from there, Ford later brought out an estate car based on the same mechanical running gear, but with more useful load area at the back. They had cars which would appeal then to fleet buyers, as well as to private individuals, people who wanted to use a car as a family car, people who wanted to use a car in their business, people who wanted to use a car on the weekend to go off on a fishing trip or whatever with the estate car. And they seem to fill various slots in the market from the one basic conception of 1959. I've got it. See you up there. Some special models were also made by companies such as the ice cream van, which was made by Marque and Walter, based on the van, which was cut down and with a fiberglass top added.
Thank you. Come on, cheer yourself up, man. Make never happen.
There are a couple of interesting features of the ice cream van, in as much as there wasn't sufficient headroom inside for a person to stand up if they stood on the floor. So there was a removable panel in the floor of the van so that the person could take this piece of wood out and actually stand down on the road while serving ice cream from the vehicle. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! Happy birthday!
Apart from being a small car to bring them into the next decade, it also paved the way for larger cars, which were also to use more modern mechanical items.
The car that really put Ford on the family car map in the 60s was the Cortina. It set Ford off on a new road because it offered family car room at economy car prices.
The Cortina was launched in 1962, so obviously it was developed in the late 50s. At that time, Ford had 2 ranges of car. They had the small prefect models and the larger Consul Zephyr Zodiac range. Now, what they needed was a smaller car to fit in between the 2, and that's where the Cortina was destined to go.
We're at Cortina, Italy, famed as a winter sports resort, where 19 world champion race and rally drivers are being feted for having accumulated more than 200 wins in 26 countries driving the Ford Cortina, named the International Car of the Year. When the world's finest drivers get together, something exciting is bound to happen. And in this case, it's the discovery of an exciting new sport called autobobbing. Here's what the famed bobsled run looks like from the driver's seat of the world-famous Cortina. Championship sleds travel the course at about 50 miles per hour, and the Cortina exceeds that speed while taking some of the turns with only 6 inches of clearance.
It started off as the Mark 1. That carried on for 4 years. That was a very square, standard design, conventional transmission layout. It caught on, the public liked it. It was a very reasonable price. It was just above the smaller Minis and other such cars of the time, and it did sell very well. The Mark 1 sold over 1 million items, almost half of which were exported to countries all around the world.
I particularly like my Mark 1 Cortina because it reminds me of my youth. I've had all the Mark Cortinas, but I like the Mark 1 best because of the shape and its design.
This 1600E Mark II was bought originally in 1969 by a member of the family, and we've had it ever since. And it was one of the first family saloons that had the touch of executive about it. The wood trim and the sort of steering wheel and the sporty lines. And I've liked them ever since.
The Cortina, right from the start, was the new family car. The brochures talked about the mould-breaking car. It was obviously something that somebody was supposed to have to be, again, very up-to-date. It's most obviously signified by the marketing, particularly Mark II Cortina, when they got their confidence. And you get, in the late 60s, the design features that were current of the black and white, the op art, are actually reflected in the adverts and in the brochures. And so you get girls wearing black and white checked hats, you get car boots full of black and white balls, you get this traditional family car, again, being presented as something exciting.
Then in 1970, October, the Mark III Cortina was launched. Now this was a completely new car, everything on it was new. It was called the metric car, as we've now gone into the metric era. It had a very American styling. Coke bottle styling was one term used to describe it. It certainly had Mustang looks about it. It had a whole new range of engines, up to the 2000cc, making it a much faster car.
I like the Mark III Cortina, basically because of the style, the comfort. It was designed an American style, and I've always liked the Mustang, so this style is the next best thing.
The Mark IV Cortina was launched in October 1976. It was certainly the reps car of the 70s and 80s, as well as the family car, which it always had been. And it brought total production of Cortinas to about 4.2 million. The Cortina was often called the Dagenham dustbin, and this was obviously an insult to the car, and which was probably a result of its success, because it's a quirk of human nature that they love to knock something that is successful and see it fall in even the smallest way.
The paradox is that the Cortina became successful because in one sense it was ultra safe and ultra conservative mechanically, but was actually quite exciting compared with other cars visually. Obviously the Capri, when that was launched, the car you have always promised yourself, was again something of the slightly dream element about it.
This is the new Ford Capri. A genuine fastback that's fun to drive, but doesn't cost a fortune. A car that you'd take for a sleek two-seater, but in fact will hold 4 adult-size adults in comfort.
With the Sierra, when it was launched, it was obviously based on a prototype. And again, the marketing of that was rather strange, that you got these surreal scenes to suggest the future, to suggest that in a Ford, you were forward-looking and you were very much up to date.
I suppose you could say that the Ford Motor Company, certainly up until the end of the Cortina era, was still very much recognisably the company that had been founded by Henry Ford. Then Ford decided it was going to change its image. This really came about with new models like the front-wheel drive Escort, the Fiesta and the Sierra, which changed away from the traditional boxy Fords into a sleeker, more upmarket view. It's not always something I think that Ford has been able to carry off as well as it might, and it's sometimes been misunderstood for trying to jump too far from where it was before. But I think as long as Ford is controlled by product enthusiasts, it will always be successful. Sometimes it's had the, what one might call the bean counters in charge. But there was a lovely story about when old Henry Ford was in charge in the 1920s, and his son Edsel complained that the accounts department was too cramped. Henry went into the factory and looked at the office where the accounts department was. He said, "I agree with you," and he sacked them all. He said, "Now there's plenty of room." And I think as long as Ford keeps its product at the top of the tree, it'll have no problems, because it's still got that vision of providing acceptable transport for the great multitude.